Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our session today, Modernize Infrastructure Access and Implement Zero Trust Security using Microsoft Azure AD and Banyan Security Zero Trust Remote Access. A few things to go over first. Please type your questions in the Q&A box and we'll either respond during the session or at the end of the presentation. We will be posting a link to our survey. Our surveys provide us with the ability to improve our processes, so we greatly appreciate your feedback. Your speakers today are Natee Pretikul, Principal Program Manager with Microsoft Identity, Tarun Desikan, COO and co-founder of Banyan Security, and Upendra Mardikar, Chief Security Officer with Snap Finance. We'll be kicking off today's session with Tarun. Over to you, Tarun.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on modernizing infrastructure access and implementing zero trust security. In our agenda today, we're going to cover this in 4 sections. We're going to start out with Upendra talking about Snap Finance and how they rolled out zero trust network access. And we're going to have Natee go into more details on how organizations worldwide are deploying their zero trust strategy. Then we're going to go into a little bit of specifics on how you can implement zero trust using both Banyan as well as Azure, how other customers have done it. And finally, I look forward to a lively discussion on how people have done things and what lessons we've learned. With that, I'll hand over to Upendra.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, guys. Upendra Mardikar. I'm Chief Security Officer for Snap Finance. For those who don't know what Snap Finance is, it's a fintech company. It's a mid-size, about 1,500 employees. So we cater to the UK market and obviously the big US market over here. We are into this space called BNPL, which is buy now, pay later, lease to own, and we also have products for lending. Now we are different from the other BNPL companies. Where we differ is we target subprime customers. And our customers are like, we call lovingly ALICE. ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Yet Employed. So it's very gratifying company where we not only are fintech, where we are disrupting the financial services and trying to make the life easy. At the same time, we are making life easier for customers like ALICE. And so if you can please take us to the next slide, Tarun. So about Snap Finance, like I said, it's very gratifying to help customers. While we were on this journey, March 2020, as most of us know, COVID hit us. I hope your loved ones are safe. And, we had started that particular journey, and it says from office base to remote base. We already were Office 365 customers. So Microsoft helped us during this particular journey as we were going completely remote. But one of the things that happened to us during that, like to all of us in the world, right? Immediate shelter in place, as shown over in the graph. In 2020, we had to do social distancing, so nobody was allowed. And I will tell you what that impact was to Snap Finance and how we did it. Travel restriction, like I said, we are UK, US, and we have multiple offices within US. Suddenly, because of the shelter in place, we had lots of travel restriction. We had to do the crisis communication in a secure way, because lots of rumors were floating around, if you remember those days. And even now, there are lots of messages that you don't know which one to believe and which one will come from the company and what the company enterprise policy will be during this crisis. And then change to the enterprise budget, right? So cost became super important because we did not know what to do. And even now, obviously the stock market is going up, Delta Plus, all these variants are coming up right now as we speak, today. So there is still uncertainty in the enterprise budget. And, just to top that entire thing, in addition to having a pandemic, we also have something called cyber pandemic, right? So World Economic Forum, as you guys know, has called two pandemics right now, right? That world is facing. So one is, the COVID-19, and another one is the cyber pandemic with all these very, very high profile attacks that are happening. And okay, I think high profile attacks are happening. So if you can please take us to the next slide. So now let me, tell you, as CISOs, what were the multiple drivers, and hopefully you will resonate with this story. So we have customer care, which is the customer support call center. Now, those guys, they had to be immediately working from home. They used to come to the office, and, obviously for the lending products, there would be some sensitive information. So that is one of the security challenges. As to the home network themselves, right? Because of the COVID, shelter in place, we don't know as CISOs how their home network is secure. There could be IoT devices, they could be using default passwords. So we did not know how the home network would be secure in the first place. The second thing, and this journey started, and we are using, like I said, Office 365, multiple cloud service providers, right? So the cloud service providers, as we go and have SaaS in the CRM, right? For example, like Salesforce and all that, they are in cloud. Our expense management system is in cloud. Our HR system is in cloud. So as we are talking about this proliferation, these systems were no longer on-prem. We being a medium-sized company, if you will, I don't want to call ourselves small company. We are using all these services. So just imagine the proliferation of cloud services. So that's another driver that was happening. And a third thing, that is very critical, near and dear to our heart, is DX, or our employee experience, EX, right? What is the user experience going to be? Are we going to ask for 100 different passwords, 100 different MFAs, or we are just going to make it so seamless for these guys, especially when you are dealing with the computers that are being issued by the company. So those were the three drivers. And at the bottom, obviously, there is always a constant fear of this cyber pandemic that we talked about, right? So we need to be secure. We need to enable all these different cloud services, and we don't know how the home networks are. So when we started, so next slide, please. So when we started on this journey, we created this 7-step ladder, right? And I'll just briefly go over that and how our zero trust network access journey was. So we had to enable work from home. I mean, we had no choice. Now, at that particular point, if you think about it, we obviously had VPN. Our employees were working from home, and even my previous employers, we all were working from home occasionally, not all the time. And there was a scalability issues, when you have VPNs, people logging in with MFAs and all that. So we had those controls. It's not that we did not have VPNs. The problem was, the performance, like I was talking about. Another problem is the scalability as such, how scalable the solution would be. It was very soon it was crawling, and then we were trying to log into multiple data centers. We had to, have VPNs at multiple instances. And if you are in UK, okay, log into this VPN. And if you are here, go, onto this location on the West Coast or go on the East Coast. So we had to play around, and, we just had to do it, right? Because of shelter in place. Then what we started doing, guys, is a security awareness and phishing campaigns and secure work from home. So we started training people over there. So go back to those days where you just had to do shelter in place. What do we do, right? So we enabled work from home. We started saying that, okay, what is the threat? So we did threat modeling exercise. During that threat modeling exercise, one of the weakest links was insecure modems, insecure networks, right? Home networks. So we started training them that, hey, go over here. If you have this modem, log in over here, change your password, turn off these kinds of services, turn on your firewall. So that kind of training awareness, security awareness videos, we started pushing, to our employees and contractors as well. The third thing that we started doing was phishing campaigns. So lots of phishing, because the phishing was very high at that time. The phishing numbers overall industry wide, they increased about 730%. Let me get that number, but I think there was like 30,000%. That's the number. 30,000% phishing numbers increased by. So what we started doing was, even now we get lots of phishing. Obviously we have good technologies over here. The industry gets lots of phishing campaigns. We kept on educating our customers, and there was an important element called human factor. So that's the initiative which started. Sure, you can prevent phishing emails from coming in. Sure, you can prevent employees and contractors on clicking on that link or falling prey to that phishing campaign. And you can stop the request going to the command and control center or whatever. However, that human factor, stopping that human being from clicking on that link, is where we focused our energy, while making sure that there is a prevention and there is, for both on ingress as well as egress. EDR and all this malware, I'm sure you guys are also looking into it. IAM, the security posture management, and it's not just CSPM, it's your entire security posture management was the step number 4 that we did. Now, the step number 5 is an interesting one, which is what the scope of this particular conversation is zero trust network access. Right. So this became a super popular in our company, especially when we had to get rid of VPN. So no MFA, you just open your laptop and boom, you are connected. You are secure. So user experience wise, it was super hit. Obviously, there were issues while we were configuring. We had to put certificates and all that, but those were nothing compared to the ongoing friction that people were having. So zero trust network access is where we spend lots of energy. Now, the good news is that with that particular thing, we did not have to, work too much on the home networks, even though people were doing their secure home network configuration, but it was less of a worry for us. We started doing UBA, and then step number 1, we are still tweaking our AI models. We are learning as we go. That's how we took care of this zero trust network access. So in general, the experience has been pretty positive. We still have some work to do. A lot of work to do on the Boyd side of the equation. So that, if you guys have any ideas, would love to learn and partner. But Tarun, over to you, please.
Maybe one question for you, Upendra. Do you think COVID actually improved the overall security of your organization? Would you have done all of these without the pandemic coming into play?
Yeah, so that is a very good question. So what has happened is that COVID has certainly accelerated this. Will we have done zero trust network access? The answer is yes, because as we go ahead and look at the trends that we were talking about, cloud, right? The trend we was talking about, the performance and just the general friction, to our, we have lots of salespeople, right? I mean, they go on the field. Just imagine where they have to go and VPN every time they are trying to make a sale, right? That is going to be very kludgy experience. So to answer your question, COVID accelerated all this. Distributed workforce, COVID, lots of companies, they are very open for remote work nowadays. Yeah, this location can be remote, you don't have to come to office. So those kinds of things have happened now. COVID has certainly accelerated. My thinking is that zero trust network access is the way to go anyways for any organization.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, great timing. Thanks for sharing, your story about how you drive zero trust during the pandemic, Upendra. I think from Microsoft's side, we actually recently released the zero trust adoption report to actually understand how CISO like yourself and around the world are thinking about, zero trust adoption in general. And based on the result and outcome, we clearly see that in a hybrid workplace, especially COVID, is a top motivator to drive zero trust because employee has to work everywhere, and it's hard to understand what's the right strategy to put in place. As well as there's a lot of thinking around how can organization improve the end user experience and productivity, because imagine in the past, people might meet in person more often, but during the COVID-19 pandemic time, a lot of users have to interact via Microsoft Teams, Zoom, and different collaboration, solutions. So it's really important to have the right experience with the security in mind. And if you go to the next slide here, we also learned, which is quite surprising, that around 4 out of 5 of the survey companies have or are working toward a hybrid workplace slash the zero trust kind of is really a big part of that strategy. So here, what we're also seeing is that many customers have been reaching out to different vendors, inclusive of Microsoft, around how can they put the right strategy in place. And I can give you one example of a large retail company around the world that we have talked to. The CISO also had to make a decision within a week to allow all the employees to work from home for the very first time, because that had not been the case in the past. And I think your journey slide opened around like how can you drive and work from home, have the right IAM strategy, and then zero trust. Those exactly what had gone through the mind of that CISO. And at the end, our team was able to help think about driving that IAM policy and integrate it with zero trust network access. That had been very, very helpful because there are many private applications that employees have to use. And that's why I think hopefully your lesson and share here will be helpful for many customers. I think the next slide here will also demonstrate what are the top barriers when it comes down to zero trust, because a lot of IT leaders also have to make a case to the top executive around like what makes sense to drive towards zero trust. And what we really learned from this survey is that a top 2 things come to mind. One is around resource challenges, and the second one is around leadership buy-in. I mean, it might sound like simple, but getting everybody across the organization to buy in is really the key, right? And when I talk about resource challenges here, it's really about how can the team has the right software, the right tool, the right processes, and change management in place to drive towards zero trust. And the second one, I got one rare example from another friend in the industry. She told me that she's trying to get CEO to just turn on MFA or enable the C staff to turn on MFA, but because CEO doesn't like the experience, and that's it, the project is doomed. And then people to use weak password and a bad security posture. And once the security incident happened, then it's become like a very rushed job, right? So to me, like anybody in the call here who experienced this type of example, Microsoft now has a zero trust adoption report to also like you can use this to share to your executive team, to your team, to kind of demonstrate how others, customer like yourself, are going through this experience. And we have some good stat, more in the survey. Back to you, Tarun.
Awesome. I know we have some questions, so let me just maybe look at them for a second and maybe bring it up for you guys to answer. We have a question here. Maybe this is starting with you, Upendra. How is a VPN different from ZTNA?
Okay, yeah. So VPN, I mean, Tarun, you can explain, but I can tell you at a higher level and don't want to get into too much technical detail. So let me tell you the technical side and the user experience side. So from the user experience side, for our customers, we issue, for our employees, we issue our laptops, right? So that is what we have done. And we have Boyd. One of the things, team, that from the user experience perspective for VPN is that when you open your laptop, let's say you are at a hotel or you are at your home, which is not in the work environment, when you open your laptop, for the VPN, you have to go into the VPN, you have to connect to that particular VPN, and then maybe you have enabled your MFA, and then your computer creates a virtual private network, right? I mean, that is what the VPN technology is. So there is a friction, as you can see over here, and you are creating a virtual private network. From the ZTNA perspective, which is a zero trust network access, and I don't know, I didn't mean to give you the entire meaning of that acronym. What happens is that when there is lots of device identification, from the technology perspective, that when you connect yourself to the network, you know that this particular resource or the equipment that is connecting to your corporate network is actually trusted and secure, because that's the ultimate goal. So the goal of VPN and goal of zero trust network access is to make sure that the devices that are connecting to your network are the right devices or not. So zero trust, because of the device fingerprinting and because of the whatever happens over there, and Tarun can tell you exactly, we put certificates, there is some proprietary algorithms, we have a confidence that this particular network device is the right device. Yeah. Now, if you think about VPN, let's say you are going to a SaaS application, and be it Salesforce or whatnot, right? If you were to really secure that particular communication, you first have to go VPN, go and log into corporate network, right? And then send a request to SaaS, right? So that you say that this particular thing is coming from your company's employee. Zero Trust Network just eliminates that particular step, so that we can configure in such a way that any communication to the SaaS platform, is coming from your device. So Tarun, you want to add more color to it?
No, I think that's a great answer. And I think if I were to summarize, the VPN puts a lot of trust in the network. It basically connects you to networks and puts the trust in the network, while a ZTNA solution doesn't make any assumptions about the network and instead puts the trust on the device. And as I mentioned, we use a device certificate to do that. Other companies might use agents. There are different techniques, but fundamentally the difference is when you're in the office, it makes sense to put the trust in the network because it's a physical network, you can trust it typically. But when you're a remote culture or you have cloud services, trusting the network is hard. So instead, you have to trust the device. And the second aspect, which Azure AD and Banyan help with, is you also want to give access to specific applications. So you want to publish your applications either in the Azure AD portal or as a Banyan infrastructure service. And by giving the workforce access to specific applications, you don't have to give them broad access to entire networks. And that also reduces the attack surface, as it were, if someone were to breach a network. Awesome. That's a great segue into this topic, which is we're just going to spend 5 minutes, maybe deep dive a little bit into what zero trust access is, just kind of build on that question. When we are talking about zero trust access in this webinar specifically, we're really focused on infrastructure that's running in your corporate networks. So these corporate networks, as Upendra mentioned, no longer just run on-premise or in your data center. Oftentimes they're running in the cloud, in AWS, they're running in Azure, and oftentimes they may be even running as SaaS. So we're not dealing with just one user needing to access one application. In most corporate environments, we have hundreds of different types of users accessing oftentimes thousands of different types of applications. And the traditional tools to do this, as we've been talking about, are VPNs. So VPNs, you fire up a VPN client, you authenticate your MFA, it drops you onto a network. Then you might have some additional layers. You might have a gateway, you might have a bastion, you might have firewalls. You'll have some additional tools to then grant access from an employee into this internal application. And these internal applications, they span the spectrum. Sometimes they are simple websites where you upload your vacation data. Sometimes they are ERP portals where your entire organization's resource planning is done. Sometimes they are development tools. Sometimes they're SSH servers, Windows servers. There's a lot of internal infrastructure that organizations and enterprises of a certain size run. And this is how it has been done for 20 plus years. So the idea behind Zero Trust is that you don't need to use all these traditional appliances. You can instead use a cloud delivered system to manage access into your internal resources. And one deployment model at Banyan, we call it a global edge deployment model. And so what essentially that means is in your corporate network, you just deploy a little connector and the connector dials out. And then in the Banyan Cloud Command Center, you manage all the policies, who accesses what and so on, and you publish your services. And from your user's perspective, they get the experience that Upendra spoke about, which is they just open their laptop and they have click button access into the internal applications they need. That is a zero trust approach to access, and the kind of the traditional VPNs and gateways and firewalls are no longer needed to grant secure access into your corporate resources. Just as a side note, Banyan also provides a private edge model. So if you're a sensitive organization, if you have compliance requirements or you're cloud savvy, Banyan allows you to host the data plane yourself. And that is very useful for certain type of organizations to scale out. For example, if you have heavy network requirements, instead of having to go through somebody else's cloud. So for compliance and throughput, you also have a private edge deployment. Now, regardless of how you deploy the product, you get what we call our zero trust security model. And just what we're explaining here is that you have a user on the left-hand side trying to access an internal application or a resource on the right-hand side. Traditionally, they would turn on their VPN, jump through a few hoops, and get access. Instead, in this new approach, in a zero trust approach, we use the components we just deployed previously. And now every single access is explicitly authenticated and authorized. So if a user was, say, to try to SSH into a server, that request comes back to a central command center for explicit authentication authorization. And in our partnership with Azure, we integrate with Active Directory to establish the user credentials, the user trust. We also integrate with Microsoft's device tooling, Defender, Intune, and so on to establish device trust. And once you know that it's a user and device with an appropriate level of risk, that's when you get access. And access is always granted using short-lived credentials. And anytime something about the device or the user changes, the risk posture changes and that access gets revoked. So that's what we call a zero trust security model. And that's what differentiates a ZTNA solution from kind of a more traditional network access VPN solution. It is the tight integration with identity and device tooling and not as much reliance on the network. So you get the benefits of a fine-grained access control, you get the click button user experience that we need to replace VPNs, and finally, you can roll it out at scale across the world very quickly and conveniently. And that's why organizations typically adopt a zero trust to access their infrastructures.
Awesome, really good new cool technologies here, Tarun. I think many customers would definitely be interested, especially what we have seen from Azure AD side in the past 2 years. We have seen significant growth of all the leading zero trust network access solution providers. And I think one key thing to also highlight, because we heard from customer loud and clear, while you have really strong networks security and zero trust strategy, it's also important to think about how can you protect the front door, because of all the major attack, sometimes when the admin or highly privileged user still use weak authentication or weak password, it still allow people to go in and really do some kind of crazy activity inside. That's why turning on MFA, using things like passwordless technologies from different vendor, inclusive of Microsoft, that'd be super helpful. And based on our stat that we have looked at all the security issue that had been prevented because of MFA. In fact, this stat show that MFA helps to prevent 99.9% of identity attacks. So it's really important for all of you to think about how can you roll out MFA with Azure AD and Banyan security, as well as thinking about passwordless, which is really, really important strategy moving forward. In fact, I recently read some article from leading analysts, and they also recommend that now passwordless real is ready. So that's something that you should kind of adopt as part of your journey all up. So, and for the next slide here.
Natee, just a question here.
Yeah,
have you had any concerns with user experience as it comes to MFA? Do people complain that they're being MFA too often, or they don't have their phone, so MFA is problematic? How do you deal with that?
Good question. I think it's important to have the right policy when it comes down to MFA, right? For example, if user have device trust, let's say they use this device for all the time, then we kind of know this is something that they'll always do to come in, and then we can use Azure AD risk score engine to determine should we prompt MFA or not, because if we prompt every time, then it become a bad user experience, right? So to me, it's come down to both setting up the MFA, second, use the right policy, and leverage risk score engine to enable the right user experience.
Right.
Yeah, and just to add, Tarun, that is a good question. So when teams are going to go ahead and implement MFA, very few people, not every company will pay for mobile phones or, a Microsoft Authenticator and all that. So they have to install an application, which we did, right? We had an app installed on mobile phone for all the employees and all that. But, very few people, they might push back that, hey, it is my phone. Why should I put Microsoft Authenticator on, So, one thing, we ran into that as well, in full transparency. But, we were very quickly able to pivot and use soft tokens OTP at that particular point. And, for the critical ones, we issued hard token OTPs. So that is how we worked around that particular issue. But that was rare, and the practitioners over here who are on the call, they might run into that kind of issue to convince certain people that, hey, it's void and why should I install it on my phone? There are other ways that we were able to work around that issue.
Well, and what about SMS as two-factor authentication? Is that still approved, or has it we've decided SMS is not the right way to do things?
So for us, we are using a continuously authenticator. So the push notification is what we get. So we don't use SMS based. But in certain cases, right, not for the employee access, but for customer access, we'll potentially have to allow those kinds of things, because not all phones are smartphones, so for those kinds of customers, we have to allow. But we prefer authenticator and those kinds of, applications, if you will.
And a few things to add to what Upendra mentioned. What we have seen from Microsoft side is that for customer, especially in the restricted industry like finance, is a great one. SMS is also deemed as not the strongest MFA of all. It's already better than just username plus password, right? So I think it's really about the risk level you would like to protect, plus even the MFA prompt via the authenticator apps. we also see that some user who might not be tech savvy, when they get prompt, they tend to get accept on the phone all the time, and that's not what we would like to see from the end user perspective. That's where like things like having number meshing or having some kind of code meshing when you have like prompt to MFA, that is another strategy to kind of mitigate that type of behavior. So it's really important to think through who are the end user, what type of MFA to turn on, and then what type of strategy to put in place to not really kind of put a lot of prompt to the end users, right? Which lead me to our bread and butter from Azure AD side. We have our kind of technology called Azure AD Conditional Access. This really has been one of the top rated feature during the pandemic because to my point earlier, when people sign in and they have to like find the right experience for the end user, our conditional access actually can help there because we have integration with all Microsoft Cloud solution as well as third-party solution to look at different risk profile from the user, device, application, and then we have our machine learning to determine if the sign-in high risk, low risk, or medium risk based on all the signal that we have. And then we enable IT admins and C-level executive to put the policy for all kinds of action that they can take. Like, if the risk profile is awesome, if they log in from trusted device, then they can just join in without requiring MFA. But when the risk kind of score kind of go out to be like medium risk, maybe you want to prompt MFA. And if the risk is high, you know exactly this is going to be hacker trying to enter your organization. Maybe you limit the access, or you can also request password reset if the password is weak. So there are a number of things now that we enable our customer to put policy in place during the pandemic. And we think if you haven't really seen it before, highly recommend to look at it as part of your Zero Trust strategy all up. So I guess back to you, Tarun.
Awesome. I'm going to stop sharing so we can actually maybe answer some questions and discuss with the audience. Please use the chat window, the question and answer window, and we'll get to it as soon as we can. We have a question here. How does Windows Hello work with Azure? It doesn't work with on-prem Active Directory. So what does that integration look like? I think this has to be you, Natee.
Yes. Definitely. So I have to first of all admit that I'm not the Windows Hello expert, but let me kind of tell you a few things that I will get back to your question after the call. Today with Windows Hello for Business, many customers use it to integrate with ADFS and Azure AD to actually enable sign in. But when it comes down to passwordless, you have to connect with Azure AD only because it's not gonna come from on-prem AD or ADFS. So that's the kind of short answer. But yeah, I think from the actual on-prem integration, I have to get back to you there.
Awesome. Maybe an unrelated but slightly related question is, if I have on-premise AD, how do I get started with a Zero Trust journey? Maybe Upendra, I know you guys are an Active Directory customer. You've used Active Directory for a long time. How did you think about migrating from on-premises Active Directory, on-premise environment to cloud and cloud security?
Yeah, so it was for us because we started that journey when we were very small over here. In my previous life, obviously we have on-prem, Active Directory. So my previous employers had on-prem deployments. But the way we were doing it was pretty seamless for us, to be honest with you. And all our users completely on Office 365 right now. And however, I have to say that this happened before I joined. So the Office 365, that entire journey happened before my time, and I did not hear any issues over there.
Got it.
But I would be very happy to connect if anybody is interested to have whatever experience as well, so that we can have lessons learned, if you will, and share that.
can I add one more thing on that? I also have been talking to multiple customers over the past year about this topic really because many customers might have AD on-prems, but they have Office 365, which means that they have Azure AD included as part of their Office suite. And they know that to enable the scale as well as leveraging our policy engine and all the kind of cloud-based security, they actually decided to move to Azure AD quite a bit in the past 2 years. And we also have seen significant growth of the usage as well. A few things to keep in mind as you think about moving from AD on-prem to Azure AD. One is it's important to look at kind of migration in the stages kind of angle in terms of for the customer or for the end user who already use Office 365 and maybe have the least access to all the legacy application or they mainly use Office 365, for example. That may be the easiest to migrate first. And the second part is how can you do all the inventory of the resources and legacy app that connect with AD on-prems? Because that where you also have to find the right path to move these legacy application either to modernize it and connect with Azure AD or connect with ZTNA solution like Banyan security and then connect with Azure AD to protect those applications. And at the end is how can you have the right change management to train end user to start using new feature from Azure AD and Banyan and different security solution. And at the end, it's basically fully migrate everybody and turn it off because the end goal is to leverage the latest security solution. Like for example, Azure AD, we just released passwordless kind of technology recently this year. And this kind of thing will come from the cloud-based solution. And really, I think that will be the journey where many of you should think through it. I'll also post a link to our Zero Trust deployment guidance on how you go about migrating to Azure AD. That might be a good resource for all of you. I'll post it in the next 1 minute. Back to you, Tarun.
I think you guys both touched on some good points. The one thing we find in enterprise environments is that most organizations have already invested in Office 365. Like most people have done I would not say the easy migration, but the critical migrations. Leave the on-premise Exchange, move to Outlook online, and so on. And oftentimes, what we find left over is the hard stuff. It is remote desktops. It is SSH servers that are also very critical to the business, but don't lend itself to an easy migration. They're not, for example, SAML-enabled web applications. And that I agree is not easy. It actually takes IT initiative, and that's where the VPN is usually used. And that's where modern zero trust solutions can also come in. I think inventorying, just having an idea is often a place to start. And Natee and I are working on a discovery project where oftentimes IT teams don't even know what these resources are that are secured with Active Directory. And there are techniques that vendors like us provide to automatically discover these resources, help you publish it, and so on.
I think one story that Tarun, you can remind me. I just talked to one of the traditional kind of news company, and I didn't know that now like 80% of the employees are developers. I thought that it's a reporter and all those people who publish news online. And the problem there for them is that because almost all the developer create LOB apps internally that IT admin has no idea.
Right.
And this is where like the app discovery and inventory of all the resources and apps become key, right, to the zero trust world.
Yeah. And we were talking about kind of on-premises Active Directory, but if you look at even the more modern companies like the one you mentioned, they are cloud first, they're in AWS, but they often have the same problem. They might be using an AWS directory, but it's not tied to the central corporate Azure AD. And you still have the discovery problem. You still have, how do I manage secure access into these environments? People call it shadow IT, but oftentimes that's not true because that is the more primary IT now. That's how most people are used to doing their work.
Yeah.
Tarun, that is a right point. We also moved, all our AWS thing to the single sign-on, right? I mean, with Office 365, because Natee was talking about, we wanted MFA, single sign-on from the user experience perspective. So all the AWS workloads, because we are a cloud native organization, all the AWS workloads, we immediately moved on to Office 365 SSO. And to your point on inventory, um, there are organizations that I work for where you are absolutely right. IT cannot know what applications are because there are going to be so many different organizations, business units. They deploy their services and they come and they go, right? So it's very difficult to inventory that. So doing whatever Natee was talking about, in the sense that doing in stages, right? Start with what you know, start migrating, and on-prem AD, you have to migrate it to Office 365 is my personal opinion. We went through that journey. It was pretty seamless for us, luckily.
Yeah, actually, that is a question that just came on the Q&A saying, do you have to migrate to Azure AD before you implement Zero Trust Network Access?
Yeah,
He's going to give a very opinionated view on the subject.
Yeah, I think a few things to keep in mind, right? On-prem AD in a way, like it's not a technology that Microsoft invests in anymore, because we believe that cloud speed is a lot more important. Like when we launch new feature, new things, you get it almost right away. Plus, when you think about when Microsoft starts to see risk for trend and all the security, we apply those updates almost real time. So to answer the question, I do recommend to use Azure AD as part of Zero Trust strategy. It's hard to say like you have to use this versus that to kind of go to Zero Trust, but in reality, the more you can be protective of your resources, the more you can leverage the cloud security advanced functionality here. It'll be helpful, especially when we talk to most of our customer today. They talk about leveraging our Azure AD conditional access together with ZTNA solution to actually do a Zero Trust, in a way like journey and migration toward the new kind of more secure way of doing things, right?
Right. I couldn't agree more. I think there are solutions that allow you to do what they call zero trust without migrating to the cloud. Right. They allow you to use your on-premise Active Directory. But if you think about it, the only way that works is if they connect you to the network first, which in many ways is the opposite of zero trust. It's like I'm going to connect you to the network and trust the network. And in fact, that's how the SolarWinds hack actually happened. Is they found a compromised identity provider. They got onto the network. They were able to get identity credentials, and then they were able to proliferate. And so while you could do it, I think it's not the best practice. It's probably not.
Yeah, so I think the question, Tarun, if and you both are right. I think the spirit of the question is, if somebody wants to do the ZTNA and start an initiative within the organization, all right. Now they obviously have to go ask for budget and leadership support that Natee was talking about. So when you are a practitioner and when you are asked that, hey, before doing that, migrate this entire, mammoth of AD that you have built for years together, migrate it to Office 365 first before you even talk about zero trust. I think that's the spirit of the question, right? Is there an easy way? And I think that is what the spirit of the question is. Is there an easy way where they can get some, quick wins within the organization that, hey, we have enabled zero trust quickly, all right? While trying to see if we can move the entire Active Directory. I think that's the spirit as to how can he create the budget and what falls above the line and below the line, and how can he push within the organization.
Yeah, we actually see this a lot because we come from the ZTNA side while Natee comes from the Azure AD side. We see this a lot where it's not just the budget. Sometimes it's the department. The department that wants to do ZTNA is the network team and the DevOps team. And oftentimes it's a very different department than the identity department that manages Active Directory and Azure AD. And so they will have an internal initiative And so at least in Banyan's offering, in both our free offering and our business offering, we have a lightweight identity provider just baked in. We would never call this a corporate identity provider. It is very lightweight username, password, but it doesn't have all the sophistication of a really enterprise identity provider like Azure AD. So that allows these network teams to get started quickly, do small groups, 10 people, 50 people, 100 people. So we allow them to get started quickly. But I'll tell you, if you want to do a corporate-wide rollout, it's better to start with that Active Directory beast. Like, that's where you want to start, because you have to get identity correct if you're really going to get zero trust.
That's right. That's right. That's really important. And one thing that I also kind of learned last year, I talked to one of the customer and asked, "Oh, are you using Azure AD or not?" And they said, "No, I have on-premise AD, and that's the only thing I have." And I asked, "Do you have Office 365 or not?" And they say yes. I mean, sometimes people are not aware that they have Azure AD in their environment. I think it's a matter of sometimes educating, the broader team, and then even do inventory of what you have and try to leverage what you have to be secure and achieve zero trust strategy, right?
Maybe one question, this might be for you, Upendra, is did you have any unforeseen speed bumps or benefits while rolling out zero trust?
Yeah, so unforeseen, one of the things that people, I mean, it's, it has been, I won't say a completely smooth ride, right? I mean, to be honest, there were bumps as we went on this journey. Sometimes, the certificate just would expire, certain certificates, and then we'll have to, people say that, hey, I cannot log in, and then even they have to, they go on to this Banyan site, it still won't, so those kinds of issues, and then we'll have to send, an IT to the remote desktop, and then, fix those issues. So those were some of the issues. One of the things I think another problem is Boyd, right, for me. So Boyd is where
bring your own devices for folks who don't.
Bring your own devices.
People bringing personal devices to do work, essentially corporate work.
You're absolutely right. Thank you for that clarification. What happens, team, is that as we are, allowing remote work, right? I mean, lots of people, they want to work on their mobile phones, and then what we do is we also allow bring your own devices, right? So the Boyd is what mobile phones for work-related activities. We wanted to make sure that those are secure as well. Within the organization, how much information should we put on personal phones? Are there any privacy implications? So there are those kinds of trade-offs that we have to do. Without nobody is interested in what you do on WhatsApp or what you do on Telegram and all that. That is not what CISOs are all about. But people are worried, right? I mean, they have their banking applications, they have their, IoT applications on their mobile phone, private messages going back and forth. They are worried about privacy. So educating them is one of the things. So it's from the technical perspective, putting something on the Boyd, that is one of the resistances that we get. And from the privacy perspective, people are really worried about, hey, whether employee going to compromise our privacy or whatnot, right? So those are some of the issues that we are running into.
What about privacy on the desktop devices? Is there an expectation of, like, if I watch a Netflix movie on my laptop, a corporate issued laptop, should I not have an expectation of privacy? Should I expect the enterprise to monitor my traffic there?
Yeah, so what happens is that we tell that if it is a company issued laptop, we tell that, hey, you should not assume privacy or, over there. However, if they want to log into their banking site and all that, we obviously tell them that we are not interested in their passwords or whatnot, right? I mean, we are interested in making sure that there are no malwares on the computer. That is our intention. So we do those kinds of, we allow for those kinds of things where those kinds of transactions, people can, do the entertainment, whatever, so it depends on the company policy. Some don't allow, some allow. So I have seen both sides of the equation. But Tarun, I think communicating that is very important to the employees and contractors that this computer has been issued by the company and should be used for company purpose only. And then second thing is we monitor traffic, that is required for security, and people accept that trade-off actually.
So then coming back to the BYOD scenario, if you wanted your employees to use their phones for business, would you have to monitor all the traffic on mobile as well?
So that is where we want to communicate that we will not be doing that. And how do you do it while you're installing something to a not so tech savvy people, right?
Yes.
So
yeah.
That is a very different ball game than issuing computer. So it's a journey. Security is a journey. Security is a team sport. I keep on saying that. So, but one of the issues that we as security practitioners will face and will continue to face is void. And how do you secure void coupled with zero trust network access?
Yeah, I think one thing to note is on mobile, maybe the audience doesn't know this, but most ZTNA products take something called VPN profile. And so, especially on the newest Apple and Android devices, you get a big warning saying there is an app monitoring your traffic. And that frightens a lot of employees.
Exactly.
A lot of, especially if they are not very technical employees, it frightens them and they will not use it. And so both Azure AD's Authenticator and Banyan's app, we both have apps and they don't do this. So we are able to establish BYOD device trust without monitoring all the traffic. And that's we have a bunch of questions. I don't know if we'll have time to answer it. If you're using ZTNA and only business traffic flows to the company, the connection to my bank doesn't go through my company. It's a question. And I think the answer is it depends on the flavor of ZTNA that you use. There are some vendors that essentially will take all your traffic. And as Upendra says, you can have a corporate policies that don't monitor my bank traffic. You can have that. And there are some other vendors that will only take your business traffic flows. So Banyan is in the second camp. We only take your business traffic flows, but there are other, they call them always on VPNs. All your traffic will go through them. Maybe Natee, you can take the one before. What is your take on the idea that not all companies that are looking for information protection at the end of their journey, identity is just a mean to that goal? I think what they're asking is companies are fundamentally looking to protect their data. How do you ensure that?
Yeah, I think there are multiple things here. From the Microsoft point of view, first is you need to classify your information, right? Is it like a high risk resources or it's low risk? And we have our solution called Microsoft Information Protection that will help you do just that. And once you start to have risk profile of those file resources, then how do you enable each or the right user to access to it? Because, for example, you don't want to leak all the HR, employee sensitive information to everybody in the organization, right? So you want to restrict it in just the HR environment. Plus, if there are certain super highly sensitive information, like in the kind of even deeper, this is where like how can you leverage things like privileged access solution, like PIM and PAM, you probably heard it before, to protect those type of access. Plus, how you sometimes even record a session, right, on how like who access to it and all those things depends on the regulation that each company has to deal with. But to me, I mean, again, it required multiple kind of strategies and solutions to kind of protect those resources. Yeah.
Awesome.
And just to add, right, I mean, information protection is a very loaded term, right? And the writer, Anonymous, is absolutely right that it's a means to an end, right? So there is a confidentiality, integrity, availability. We need to protect our assets. And it's a overall strategy as security practitioners, right? I mean, encryption is one of the things, access control, so there are multiple, it's a defense in depth and there are multiple security levers. So completely agreed with that sentiment. And I agree with Natee as well. So access control, identity management is one of those levers.
Awesome. I think we're almost up on time. What Well, thank you, Upendra. Thank you, Natee. Thank you, everyone, for attending the webinar. We really enjoyed the discussion. I believe the team will put it up on YouTube for folks who want to review it later on. If you want to test drive the products, you can just come to our websites, banyansecurity.io test drive. You can actually try ZTNA for free and see if it works for your organization. And after this webinar, you'll also get a survey. So if you could fill it out, we'd love your feedback. With that, can I hand back to you, Melissa?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tarun. Thank you, Natee and Upendra. This was fantastic. And just as Tarun said, we'll be sending out some assets after our session is over. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have
Thank
a good
you.
one. Bye-bye.